Welcome to the saga of the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, which at various times called itself a tribe, at one point a church. When things went sour and there were busts, the Rolling Stone called them the hippie mafia. Among the people you're going to meet this afternoon are Timothy Leary, obviously, but also John Griggs, who started the group, and Richard Alpert, whom we all now know of as Ram Dass, and a couple of gentlemen who are in the room today, from what I understand, so we welcome them as well. The group smuggled tons of marijuana in from Mexico, did some hash, distributed millions of hits of acid. You're going to find out today the possible source, at least in part, for the development of the strain of marijuana that came to be known as Maui Wowie. And the title of this book, an LSD tablet with 200 times the regular dosage that the group manufactured, called Orange Sunshine, and that's the title of our book today. A quick review from Rob Kirkpatrick, who wrote 1969, the year everything changed, and he was here at Book Passage. Nick Schou has uncovered a bizarre, wild ride of a story that seems straight out of Easy Rider or Zabriskie Point, except that it really happened. Orange Sunshine serves as a valuable time capsule from the American counterculture, and it's also one hell of a fun read. And our guide today is Nicholas Schou. He's won more than a dozen journalism awards while writing for the OC Weekly, the LA Weekly, San Francisco Bay Guardian, LA Times, and other newspapers. His writing was selected for Best American Crime Reporting 2008 anthology, and he's also the author of Kill the Messenger, How the CIA's Crack Cocaine Epidemic Destroyed Journalist Gary Webb, which has been optioned for a feature film by Universal Studios. So would you please welcome Nicholas Schou.
It's a pleasure to be here. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Writing this book was a lot of fun. That's probably the easiest thing I can say about it. It was not an easy book to write. And I first found out about the Brotherhood actually in my own paper about 10 years ago, which was in the year 2000, and that was the 30th anniversary of a concert that took place in Laguna Beach starting on Christmas Day 1970, which I'd never heard of, and the story was called Laguna on Acid. I don't know how many people are familiar with Laguna Beach or who were back in that area during the time when this book takes place, but Laguna Beach was a lot different than the rest of Orange County, but it was not prepared for this concert. I don't know what the population of Laguna was at the time, but about an estimated crowd of 25,000 people came to attend this show, which was billed as a birthday party for Jesus, or a gathering of the tribes. And nobody really knew what to expect when they got there. There had been a lot of hype about how the Grateful Dead was going to play. Supposedly George Harrison was going to be there, Bob Dylan was rumored to be there. At one point, and none of these bands played it. Actually, the Grateful Dead in truth did know about the show, and they did send their roadies down to try to actually get into Laguna Canyon, but at that point the police had pretty much cordoned off the entire town and were trying to basically prevent anyone from coming in and trying to get all the hippies out as quickly as possible. At one point, I think it was on the first day of the show, somebody parachuted out of the sky and landed right near the stage, and everyone thought it was Timothy Leary. They never found out who this guy was. And then another aircraft, which was alternately described as a helicopter or like a small fixed-wing aircraft, flew over. And out of the back of this airplane came a big box, a cardboard box full of all these cards, these gray cards, that rained all over the audience. And each one of these cards had a tab of Orange Sunshine, which at that point was probably the most famous, most popular brand of acid in the country and around the world. Now, this show didn't exactly end well. The police pretty much they commandeered pretty much every police force in Orange County and got all these volunteers to come in and basically lined up with bulldozers and just pushed everybody out of Laguna Beach, which never really recovered. Laguna Beach is not the same town that it was back then, and now it's sort of the beginning of the end, I think you could say. But the thing about Leary being rumored to have parachuted into the show is kind of an interesting way to start this, because he had actually escaped just a few months before that from prison in Central California. and disappeared. No one knew where he was. It later came out that the weathermen had actually, arranged for him to be smuggled out of the country with phony passports, and he ultimately made his way to Switzerland and then to Kabul, Afghanistan, in 1973. And he got arrested as soon as he landed there. The DEA knew he was coming, but it turned out that it was actually this group called the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, which had also, according to this article where I found out about the group, had arranged for these acid tabs to be distributed to all the people at the show, that had actually raised the money for this operation. So it's probably, to my mind, the strangest, most least understood or known event of the 1960s, where you've got the Brotherhood of Eternal Love raising 25 grand through hash sales, because they were the biggest hash distributing network of the 1960s, giving that money to the Black Panthers, who in turn passed it on to the Weathermen, that then helped Timothy Leary, the Harvard acid guru, escape from prison and ultimately end up in Afghanistan, of all places. None of that actually, as it turned out, should be all that surprising, because in fact, Leary and Afghanistan, and specifically the Brotherhood, kind of went back quite a ways at that point. The story really starts, though, right about the time that Leary told the entire world to turn on, tune in, and drop out, which was in September 1966. And it was a month after that that a group of guys who actually grew up in Anaheim and had just formed a church called the Brotherhood of Eternal Love decided that they were going to try to turn on the world. They had read Leary's books, specifically the Psychedelic Experience, which he co-wrote with Ram Dass, who's Richard Alpert, and Ralph Metzner. And these guys from Anaheim used to, some of them were in a car club called the Street Sweepers, and they were bouncing back and forth between reform school, juvenile hall, various jails and prisons, and some of them were addicted to heroin. And by the time they were, say, about 20 years old, most of these guys were kind of reaching a dead end in their lives. And just at that time, acid sort of came along and completely changed these people and set them on a course that put them sort of in a maelstrom, really in the crux of this great cultural upheaval that was the 1960s. They probably had no idea what they were in for. And specifically, a guy named John Griggs, who was the leader of the Street Sweepers and sort of a wrestler and a very charismatic guy who grew up in Anaheim, and his friends that found out that there was a party up in the Hollywood Hills where a Hollywood producer whose name I've never been able to find out, but whose nickname apparently was Frenchie, which sounds almost like something out of a movie. And mind you, acid was legal at this point, and I don't think Griggs knew that, because he insisted on getting a weapon, a gun, and going up with his friends and stealing this stuff at gunpoint. So that's the story. They crash this party, and they get this acid, and they drop it, and Griggs immediately threw the weapon aside and started telling everybody who would listen that he had just seen God, and his life would never be the same again. He was addicted to heroin at that point. He managed to quit that, and he became just a crusader, an evangelist for LSD. He thought that the same way that it basically caused him to examine his life and the decisions that he had made that had put him where he was, that he could get all of his friends to kind of reform themselves, and that ultimately, this is something that could help the entire world. And so they started tricking their friends into going and partying out in the woods, so to speak, and they would basically dose these guys. And an ever-widening circle of people would be involved in this. And they were so convinced about acid being a wonderful thing that I believe it was Griggs, went to a sort of a community service hall. It's unclear exactly where it was. But a couple of UCLA psychologists had shown up and were basically talking to people about acid and their research with mental patients, and trying to determine whether this was something that could be useful in psychology. And Griggs walked up to these scientists and told them, we don't have any problems with this stuff at all. We think it's great. We take it all the time. Why don't you come and hang out with us? So that's exactly what happened. They convinced these two shrinks to come with them to a house in Majeska Canyon, where they had all sort of begun hanging out at a building called the Church. And there, every weekend, everybody, about 25 people at first, but more and more, would take acid, and in sort of a ritualistic way, they would have somebody who was acting as a guide that would sort of make sure everyone was feeling okay, and people would be reading from the Tibetan Book of the Dead or from the Psychedelic Experience, which is the same book that John Lennon actually was inspired to write the lines that open the song Tomorrow Never Knows, about relax, lean back and float downstream, turn off your mind. Basically, these are things that you say to people when they're lying down and having probably the most vivid, powerful hallucination of their lives. And so these psychiatrists basically ended up observing all of this, and didn't come away from it with the same conclusion that Griggs and his friends had. The name of the paper that they wrote was actually called The Bad Trip. And it was pretty interesting because I stumbled across this thing just by good fortune, because they didn't actually name the Brotherhood. It was a highly secretive group at that point. They just referred to this group of people as the Disciples, which is pretty much what they were. And so with acid as their sacrament, they formed this church in October 1966, just within days of when California became the first state in the country to ban LSD. So literally overnight, a group of people that thought that they were going to be kind of doing a wonderful thing that everybody would appreciate and would bring peace and harmony to the world became illegal, and they became outlaws. Now, there was another important thing that happened right about this time, and that is that they decided to move to Laguna Beach. And around the time that they moved to Laguna Beach during the summer of eternal love, and they opened up this store called Mystic Arts World, a couple of these guys, one second, Dave Hall, who was a friend of Griggs, and a guy who liked to travel, and his buddy Mike Hinson, who is famous to a lot of people because he's the blonde surfer in Endless Summer that catches the perfect wave at the end of the film. They decided that they were going to go to India and try to bring back a little something called hashish. And Mike Hinson, being a surfer, when he made the movie Endless Summer, and you can see him in this movie traveling all over the world looking for that perfect wave, he was actually smuggling drugs the whole time. That's what he told me. He hasn't talked about this stuff until now for kind of obvious reasons. So that's what happened. He and Dave Hall were able to bring back some very nice hash from India, and nobody had ever really tried this stuff in Southern California, and all the guys in the Brotherhood thought this stuff was wonderful, and so they all set out to try to outdo each other in bringing it back. Two characters that I talked to, who fortunately are still around and still remember this very well, you got to understand, these guys were maybe 20 years old when they did this, and it was like a sort of a warm winter day in Los Angeles. They take off, they fly to New York, there's 3 feet of snow, there's a garbage strike, they have to rush into a cab and get to the sporting goods store to find sleeping bags and warm winter jackets. They fly to Germany, and then in about a week end up driving to Afghanistan, where they have been told this is where the cheapest and really best quality hashish is. And so there in a marketplace in Kandahar started a friendship with a couple of brothers called the Toki brothers, kind of an ironic name, which wasn't lost on these two guys, who, mind you, every decision that they made that brought them to this particular marketplace and to Afghanistan was something that wasn't exactly planned out. They would consult the I Ching, for example. Before they went on this trip, they went up to John Griggs and they said, we'd like to do this thing. We want to make it happen. What do you think? And Griggs rolled the dice and consulted the book, and the passage that was selected said, "Crossing the great water will bring supreme success." So they decided to go for it. And indeed, it turned out really well. The thing is that more and more people started trying to do this. And meanwhile, all these people that were hanging out up in Haight-Ashbury during the Summer of Love were starting to get tired of that scene, and a lot of them drifted south to Laguna Beach. And at that point, the Brotherhood had opened this very famous head shop called Mystic Arts World, which happened to be across the street from Taco Bell on Pacific Coast Highway, which is still there. This was the epicenter of the psychedelic scene in Southern California. I mean, people, kids, teenagers from Hollywood or Pasadena, Glendale, San Diego, they all knew that all you had to do was basically show up at that street corner and there'd be people, making it available like peanuts at a ball game. So the police are standing there and they're kind of watching this, and they had, you know, a year earlier than that been doing nothing but arresting people at the bars, you know, for the occasion drunken fight or something like that. And all of a sudden they've got people walking up and down the street smoking pot, you know, tripping out on acid. And they had no idea what was going on, and it took them kind of a couple of years to figure out that not only was there a group of guys that had sort of infiltrated the town who were living in Laguna Canyon, which is now full of all these $1 million homes, that were basically distributing all the marijuana and all the other drugs in Laguna, but also that these guys were, as it turned out, like the biggest hashish smuggling network in the entire country. They had a fleet of Volkswagen buses and Land Rovers at any given time coming into different ports all around the country through a very kind of sophisticated process that involved friends of theirs that had been in the service, for example, who looked straight, who would sign the paperwork and pick up the cars, and the police would, you know, find out about some big bust in the canyon. They'd be really excited. They had no idea it was like a decoy operation for these trucks to get through. And this stuff was just going on and on and on. And at the same time, Warren Sunshine had been developed because Timothy Leary, having been lured to Laguna Beach by the Brotherhood around the time that this shop opened in late 1967, they had all moved up to a commune outside of Palm Springs up in the mountains. Now, originally, the Brotherhood had the idea that if they could sell enough hash, they could not only finance this acid manufacturing and sort of, in their idea, turn on the world, but they could actually raise enough money to purchase an island somewhere in the tropics. The idea was to get Leary to come out there and sort of be their spiritual advisor and just truly, truly drop out of society. What they should have known probably was that Leary had no interest at all in dropping out to a tropical island. You know, he had a lot of other stuff going on, like running for governor of California in 1969 against a certain guy named Ronald Reagan. His campaign platform was drug legalization with taxation, a lot of really radical ideas for the time, which are now considered a little bit more mainstream. Banning football in high school is just aggressive, and promoting baseballs like the state sport was another thing, and ultimately getting rid of all money and going to a barter system. Yeah, so about half of the group that was made that was the Brotherhood at that time, including Griggs and his wife and several other married couples and all their kids, they lived up in this really beautiful ranch high up in the mountains with Leary and teepees, growing their own vegetables, delivering their own babies, doing everything they would have done on this island, but just a little bit closer to LA. Now, needless to say, there were quite a few people in the Brotherhood who were full-time smugglers and thought that that was about the dumbest thing that they had ever heard of. I mean, here they are, professional smugglers that are constantly, you know, changing their identity and using phony names and coming in and out of the country. And what are they going to do? They're going to invite Timothy Leary, you know, to live with them in teepees, you know? Not everybody was up for that. And it was kind of funny because, like, for example, the Moody Blues had written a song about Leary called Legend of a Mind. And Leary didn't even know who they were, but when he heard the song, he thought it was beautiful. He invited them up, and they came and apparently dropped so much acid, it's not clear that they ever actually realized that Leary was there or anything like that. One of the Brotherhood guys that I talked to actually was sent out to try to get Mick Jagger and Keith Richards to come up to the mountain, and you know, they wanted to, but they had already been arrested for marijuana in England, and they knew that the ranch was like too hot a place. So just needless to say, most of the guys that were kind of the foot soldiers of this group didn't want to be anywhere near that. That was just a big bullseye. So most of them ended up in Maui. How that started is one of the strangest and most grandiose smuggling schemes I think ever conceived, which amounted to buying a boat called the Affy. It was like a 70-foot yacht in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands, bringing it through the Panama Canal, loading it full of high-quality Mexican marijuana, enough so that when they were able to sail it to Maui, they could sell this to all the hippies who were arriving, you know, hundreds every month, and you know, living in all these different communes, and who would make great customers for this stuff, and then sell it all, raise a bunch of cash that they could then use to sail the boat all the way to Karachi, Pakistan, and load it with the biggest load of their favorite Afghan primo hash ever assembled, and then sail it back to Maui and just live out their days. Thing is that once they got to Maui, they just started having a lot of fun surfing. They even had a baseball team called the Kula Oilers, which referenced their hash oil operation there. And one funny anecdote I was told was that there was a baseball game once between the cops, who had confiscated a big load of hash, and the Brotherhood guys, and they brought a bunch of Heineken, and the cops brought this confiscated hash, and the Brotherhood won and got the hash back. A famous guy who I think was with the Oracle in San Francisco that had come out to Maui at this time, and he ended up having a gas station, and he had a sign up in front called Hash for Gas. So that was like, it became like the local currency. That's how much of this stuff was on board there. And of course, this is sort of where Maui Wowie comes from. How that originally got started is a little bit unclear. Some of it was supposedly from the seeds of this Mexican marijuana that was brought over. But the Brotherhood were the first people that really popularized it and started shipping it back to the mainland. Indeed, often in surfboards. And so, to put that aside for 1 second and get back to the kind of craziest thing the Brotherhood did there, because mind you, these are all fugitives. These are people that have been on the run now for years. Would not want to be on camera necessarily. However, they participated in the strangest thing that probably ever happened in Maui or ever will, which was the 1972 Jimi Hendrix concert on the slopes of this volcano, Haleakala, about halfway up. So you're talking wind whipping across the fields, not exactly good audio quality, but it was basically a private show for the Brotherhood and a bunch of their friends, you know, and they just sent a bus around, and whatever hippies around the beach that they found, you know, who wanted to hear Hendrix were invited to come up and listen, and they had a tent right in the middle of the crowd where all the guys that didn't want to be on camera managed to sit and hide. Hendrix plays his show, and Mike Hinson and another guy who was friends with the Brotherhood, not really part of their organization, but who were surfing in this movie, which is a very strange movie involving extraterrestrials that the director calls Space Brothers. All different kinds of stuff are just thrown into this movie. But the strangest scene of all is when Mike Hinson and this other buddy of his break open a surfboard on camera and pull out hash, a big bag of hash. And right above them is a poster of Richard Nixon, and it says something to the effect of, "Would you buy a used car from this guy?" And so at that point, the gig was up, I think you could say. This movie ultimately premiered in Laguna Beach. And Mike Hinson, you know, wasn't just a surfer, you know, or a friend of these Brotherhood guys. He was also a business partner with Johnny Gale, who was one of the biggest, sort of most charismatic Orange Sunshine promoters, who was affiliated with the Brotherhood, and he was famous for going to rock concerts, Grateful Dead shows, The Who, and he had a leather jacket or a leather vest that said Orange Sunshine Express on the back of it, or he'd wear like an orange jumpsuit and just throw fistfuls of this stuff out at the crowd. And so he and Hinson had this company called Rainbow Surfboards, which still exists under new ownership, and they were really tripped out, sort of tie-dye looking boards, really fast, really cool boards. And that's what was being broken up in this movie. So this movie premieres in Laguna Beach, and Johnny Gale got all these free tickets from Mike Hinson because it was his birthday, and so he invited everybody, you know, in the group to sort of show up and watch this, plus a whole bunch of narcs were there, supposedly. You couldn't even see the screen for all the smoke that was wafting up to the ceiling. But at that point, the cops were just like, you know, this has got to stop. And so everybody that was found with one of these surfboards would have it cracked open, you know, at the airport, or anybody driving down Pacific Coast Highway would get pulled over. And, you know, it was really just kind of a matter of time. And it was just a few months after that movie came out that the biggest narcotics raid that had ever happened in the war on drugs, which isn't saying much because the war on drugs had really just started. I mean, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love was like the first big, you know, multi-agency, federal, state, local, the international, you know, skirmish in the war on drugs, and people were arrested in Maui and in Afghanistan with a big hash oil operation there, and up and down the coast of California, and that effectively took down the Brotherhood.
What year was that?
That was August 5th, 1972, and there were about 45 people that were arrested that day, and a whole bunch of other people, including most of the big players, including some people that are here right now, that weren't arrested. So there was this really iconic wanted poster that was put out. It was almost like a Wild West wanted poster, and you see all these guys Some of them with real clean-looking hairdos, you know, for their passports for the smuggling purposes, and other guys looking like they'd just been rousted, you know. And some of these guys managed to escape, you know, prosecution for a long time. One person I've just finally reestablished contact with managed to live until about 1995 under a different name before the police finally figured out who he was, and then they hauled him down to Orange County, and they realized he'd raised 4 kids, you know, living a normal, drug-free, crime-free life, and they dropped the charges. One other guy was a little bit less lucky because he had the misfortune of going on exactly one smuggling trip to Afghanistan, but the guy that he went with, who he thought was his friend, turned into the big snitch in the Brotherhood. And so when they had a grand jury hearing back in '72, most of it involved that trip, because that was what this one guy was able to talk about. So this one gentleman named Brenny Smith managed to actually evade capture until last September. He lived most of the time, I guess he was hiding out in California during most of the 70s, and about like 77, sometime around in there, he moved to a monastery in Nepal and chanted Om Mani Padme Hum 100 million times, praying for the benefit of mankind, and felt that that was enough. And then raised a family in Kathmandu for about 20 years, and things in Kathmandu were getting a little bit dicey, and so he tried to come back to the country. He landed in San Francisco and was promptly arrested on these 2 40-year-old hashish smuggling warrants. This is right after I'd finished writing the book, and it gives you a sense of why it took about 5 years to get people to talk to me, because as it turned out, the case hadn't quite finished yet, and it's done now. He ultimately pled guilty to one of these cases, and after about 75 days in jail, was able to get out, and I was able to talk to him briefly before he went immediately back to Nepal. He's not coming back. But one thing that was funny was in researching one of the cases that he'd been charged with, it turned out that a whole bunch of the guys in the Brotherhood that I thought had been taken care of as far as the official story by the police back in '72 had continued to smuggle hash from the very 2 Toki brothers in Kandahar right up until when the Soviet army rolled in, and just that ended it. So I find it rather ironic that it took the Red Army to finally do what the DEA was able to do. Things obviously never really improved for Afghanistan as a result of the Brotherhood being kicked out of the country, but that's just one way of looking at it. But I wasn't able to get this guy Bernie to tell me much about that, needless to say. He was not interested in talking to me. He had been grilled by somebody, and I don't know what agency it was, because the sheriff's department refused to tell me, and they blocked out the name of the guy's employer. Presumably DEA had come in there and sat down and said, "You know Timothy Leary, is that right?" And Bernie said, "Yeah, that was a long time ago, yeah. Well, what about John Griggs?" Who? John Griggs, leader of the Brotherhood? "Oh, the Brotherhood, yeah. Well, we're all in the Brotherhood. Everybody's everybody's brother and sister and aunt and uncle and cousin, right?" The guy left empty-handed without getting any information from him. And that was basically the kind of the extent of my conversation with Bernie. He was very unwilling to tell me much more than that. And I finally was able to ask him a question, the answer to which I would have ended my book with if I hadn't already finished writing it. And that was, well, what was it you guys were really trying to do as far as changing the world? What was it really about? You know, how serious were you? And he sort of took a deep breath, and a very kind of sad expression came across his face, and he said, "Well, you know, in the beginning it was really about religion. It really was. It was about love and just making people love each other and love themselves. And, you know, the police didn't really destroy the Brotherhood, cocaine did." And what he was referring to is the fact that a lot of the people that ended up becoming affiliated with the Brotherhood and wanted to get in on that action of changing the world, but hadn't really ever been quite as sincere about it as the likes of Griggs and some of the original members, realized that smuggling was really kind of a lucrative thing to do. And coke kind of came along and made a lot of people rich, but destroyed all the spirituality that this group was originally about. And so he ended up sort of signing off on that thought by saying, you know, we thought we could change the world in 5 years, but in 5 years it changed us, and it was all just an illusion. So that's one person's take on it. I think that that's probably a good place for me to end what I've got to say and answer any questions anyone has.
You mentioned someone from the Oracle. Was that Maui?
Well, the San Francisco Oracle, there was some guy, and I wish I could remember his name.
Rainbow Star.
Pardon me?
Rainbow Star. Rainbow Star.
No, I interviewed him for the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's there. But I think he works for the Oracle down in LA.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there were two different
Yeah,
Oracles.
Gershon.
And this other guy, he was pretty famous, but the name's slipping me. And
Alan Cohen?
might be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
San
his.
Francisco.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
yeah.
the person I mentioned to you, if you knew him.
Okay, no, I never was able to find him, but I would have asked him about the hash for gas thing if I was able to talk to him. But I was able to go to Maui and meet a lot of people that are still there. I don't know how familiar people are with Maui, but I got a whole like underground tour of where the Affy landed in Hana, and they couldn't bring it in there, and they had to sail it around to McKenna Beach and all the different places where they were living. It was really a blast. Maui's changed a lot, but that was a lot of fun.
What year was the party, and what's the name of the movie, and is it still, can one find it?
Oh, the Rainbow Bridge?
Rainbow Bridge.
Yeah, the name of this so-called Hendrix film is called Rainbow Bridge, and it's directed by Chuck Wine, who was a protege of Andy Warhol's.
That was on the volcano.
Yeah.
Did you say the party was in Laguna?
The party,
The party where they dropped the...
the big concert was in Laguna, and that was like Christmas 1970. A lot of things were happening in 1970, one after the other. First was this Rainbow Bridge film, which was totally crazy. I mean, I interviewed a bunch of people who swear to God that the mothership came and hovered over the concert, and like, this one guy was so detailed about it. He was like, he walked up and he peered in, and there were beveled windows, a color which he's never seen, but which approached the color of diamonds. And there was a alien that looked like Jiminy Cricket, who was wearing a French Foreign Legion cap and was running back and forth like a busy beaver, so he didn't notice me, but I didn't want to end up in their zoo, so I ran away. And then Mystic Arts World burned down right after that, which is like still under suspicion as being arson. And I've talked to people that are sure that they witnessed that, and other people that claim that local members of the John Birch Society were in town driving the hippies out, because there were other head shops that were being burnt down right at the same time. And then this crazy show, which was like the end of hippiedom.
I read the book, and I was kind of surprised because before that I'd read The Brotherhood of Eternal Love by Tabler and May,
Right.
British book. I was surprised that there was not a single mention of Ronald Stark. Did you encounter any information at all about him?
Yeah, I mean, I'd read everything that's been written about Ronald Stark, and I just couldn't add to any of that, was the main thing. This guy's like an enigma for those who aren't familiar with this guy, Ron Stark. He was a sort of slovenly man about town who spoke all these different languages and claimed he worked for the CIA. And he showed up at the ranch and became somebody that basically started bankrolling Orange Sunshine after the support sort of mechanism for that kind of fell apart. But I've never been able to find any evidence that half of what this guy was saying was true or anything like that. And plus, I was able to talk to Timothy Scully, who trained Nick Sand, who was the actual chemist of Orange Sunshine, who I wasn't able to talk to because he had health problems at the time. And Scully's working on a book about the underground history of acid production, and he was very concerned with whether or not I was going to talk too much about Stark, because he's got some big expose on that's coming. And I kind of had a gentleman's agreement with him that if he helped me quite a bit, I would lay off, which I was more than happy to do, because really all I would have been doing was just rehashing stuff that other people had said. But it was funny, right after the book came out, someone managed to track down my home number, called me and was like, "I just have one question. What do you know about Ron Stark?" Really, he didn't believe me. He thought it was part of a cover-up because I didn't write about it. It was just because I don't know.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff. There were so many characters in this book. The challenge was trying to sort of weave a narrative and not let it get too off track. And Stark comes up so late in the game. At that point, I'm trying to sort of wind things down a little bit. Plus, there were a lot of people I talked to for obvious reasons. They were like, "Well, how long does this book go into the present? Like, when do you cut off talking about the smuggling stuff?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" And people were sort of strongly suggesting that I make the end point sort of 1970.
Statute of limitations.
Well, and then I found out later that was because this stuff was going on and on.
Was, to your knowledge, was Larry's bid for governor concurrent with his contact, you were saying, before or after he met the president?
It was after. See, what happened was Griggs, had basically made it a goal of his to lure Leary out to, be a part of his, effort to turn on the world and convince everyone that LSD was a great thing. And they would give speeches together, like at Cal State Long Beach, 6,000 people listened to the two of them. And Leary and Griggs sat on this big platform on Indian rugs with incense burning, and and Leary called Griggs like his personal guru, holiest man that's ever lived in this country and everything. But I'm sorry, what was the question again?
The question was was there any evidence to suggest that, or any information? I haven't read your book, unfortunately, but I've again read the Tenant Man book.
Yeah.
So I was just from my interest in Larry, I haven't seen. I can't tell if there's. The bid for governor came after he met the Brotherhood.
No,
so
see,
the Brotherhood and he were sort of going to governate together.
Yeah.
Govern together.
What happened was he gave this press conference on Valentine's Day, 1968, I think it was, where he told local papers in Southern California that he was going to disappear and go on sabbatical.
Oh, right.
And he started talking in a really elliptical way about how there are controlled experiments going on right now where 1 million tablets of he didn't name it, but of LSD are being distributed in public spaces. And he was just basically telling the world, like,
Mind-blowing.
yeah, if weird things start happening, you know what it's all about. And what he was referring to is the fact that he was about to basically just sort of go up to the mountains with Griggs and the rest of the Brotherhood. He spent a year there writing and kind of hibernating. And then he got tired of that, and that's when he got the idea to run for governor. I don't know how serious it was, but what happened
After
was,
his winning the Laredo tax.
yeah, it was right after that. But then,
Marijuana tax.
see what happened was in December 1968, the day after Christmas, he got busted by one of these very militant local officers, which forms a major part of the plot of my book. The police gradually waking up to what's going on, and among other things, arresting Larry for pot possession. That kind of didn't help his chances at the polls. And then there were a couple of deaths at the ranch in Iowa, very tragic events that happened one after the other. And specifically a 17-year-old girl drowned while high on acid, swimming in a watering hole. She banged her head on a oil drum that was keeping a diving platform on the surface. And Leary was arrested for like child endangerment for that, even though he had nothing to do with it. So that was the end of that. Oh, and by the way, Come Together by John Lennon was the campaign song. I mean, Lennon wrote that as a gift to Leary. And Reagan won, and then he became president, so it was all okay.
And then, unfortunately, a few years of Timothy Leary, after Reagan was out of office and Bush was out of office,
Well, the
Democrats were back, and he had a.
The funny thing about Leary was part of the reason he ended up with the Brotherhood was because G. Gordon Liddy, who was a DA in Dutchess County, New York, was responsible for basically kicking him out of Millbrook, which was where he was living and where all these jazz guys were hanging out. And even before the world knew about hippies or Haight-Ashbury, they were experimenting and sort of like laying the kernels of all this there. So ultimately, after Leary basically snitched on the Brotherhood and then did some prison time after being brought back from Afghanistan, he and G. Gordon Liddy toured the country, like doing a stand-up comedy routine together and all this kind of crazy stuff.
I thought only George Chula was his lawyer, was the one that turned evidence against this.
No, I think, well, certain people would disagree with that.
Well, that's what I'm wondering.
He
There's
stitched,
not records.
he ratted on the Underground, he escaped him as well.
Yeah. I mean, he denied it later, that he, and no one knows
Were
exactly.
there arrests?
Huh?
Were there weathermen arrests? I don't know. Documented weathermen arrests.
I don't know as much about the Weathermen arrest, but yeah, no, they definitely, he did talk about them, and they found out exactly how he got out of the country. And this is produced not just as far as the Weathermen interest, but there was a big hearing on Capitol Hill in 1973 about the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, and it was called Hashish Smuggling and Passport Fraud, because it was really the Brotherhood that pioneered, and it was so easy to do back then, it's a joke, the phony passports using
Birth certificate.
yeah, birth certificates of people who died at childbirth, and then walking in on 2 separate occasions at the same passport office on the same day with like maybe a fake mustache and getting, passports one after the other. And that's how they were able to evade detection for so long, and that's what they used to get Larry out of the country. Somebody back.
Yeah, I read the book in about 3 or 4 days last week. Really enjoyed it, but that 200 times doesn't make sense to me. That seemed like it would have been massive casualty.
Yeah, no, that's the
Is that a
total.
typo?
Well, I think I'm quoting somebody there. I believe I was. Either that or paraphrasing somebody who was saying, he was responding to the fact that a lot of people found Orange Sunshine very scattered and like too intense of an experience. And he was saying something like, of course it was. It was 200 times more powerful. And then this got picked up in one of the reviews that was written. But that's not at all accurate. In fact, it's probably like 2.5 times as strong as acid. But I mean, there were certain claims like that that I left in there with the idea being that it indicates the kind of, I think what was Publishers Weekly called the stoned pomposity of the era. I mean, people would probably believe that. I don't know. But it certainly wasn't true. There's another big myth about Orange Sunshine and about the LSD that Scully was making, which was that it wasn't LSD, it was ALD, and it was technically legal. And a lot of people ask me about that, but he just made that up to try to, you know, yeah.
I believe in those days they would make a gram of acid, and that was 4,000 hits, which is 250 mics. And then Orange Sunshine was 2,000 hits to a gram, so it was 500 mics, which is was pretty strong.
Yeah, no, I mean, and the thing that, this is just my own hypothesis, there were two different people that were primarily manufacturing this stuff, or were sort of in charge of it, Tim Scully and Nick Sand. I wasn't able to interview Nick Sand, but I talked to people that talked to him at the time, and he would go a month straight making this stuff. And, you know, in a mobile LSD lab where he's probably ingesting it through his fingers, and, you know, and I think that the control wasn't there to ensure, you know, like a predictable, because by the time the late 80s, early 90s, which was when I was in college, rolled around, acid was kind of a reliably sort of predictable, much less intense kind of a situation. And I think that the divergence in opinions about how strong Orange Sunshine was had to do with the fact that it wasn't regulated, you know what I mean? It was just all over the map.
Yeah.
But a lot of people thought it was terrible. I never, can't vouch for it one way or the other.
So you said it wasn't easy writing this book, and I know access to information was one of the reasons. What were some of the other reasons that made it just a challenging process?
Because I wrote a story in 2005 called Lords of Acid that was sort of like, the idea was to follow up on the article about that Christmas concert, find people that were there back then, artists and other folks that were around, and try to gradually zoom in on who the Brotherhood of Eternal Love was. And I came across people that were more than happy to tell me all about how they were in the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, and this is what it was all about. I had no way of knowing one way or the other.
Right.
I did talk to one guy who was on this famous wanted poster, and so I thought I'd hit the jackpot, and I believed everything this guy said, and it was mostly bunk. And he was somebody that all the people I ended up finally talking to really had a word or two to say about. And so it was a combination of having to tell people that I really wanted to talk to that everything I'd written up to them was, yeah, BS, sorry, I didn't know any better, you know, and that kind of a thing. Just the general and understandable paranoia that people had. I mean, and why a lot of these guys never talk to each other. I mean, it's just like people are familiar with like PTSD for combat veterans and everything, but people that lived through the 60s, my sense of it at least, is people that were real. I mean, there was a lot of sacrifices made, a lot of tragic events that were happening. And this one guy that I talked to explained it. It was like people just thought it was part of the karmic bundle that they were being handed, and it was their duty to kind of like live through it. But in retrospect, it was really, you know, an incredibly chaotic time for people, and it's just not easy to get people to feel comfortable to talk about that. And I almost feel like a little bit like I have to catch myself and not. I think I tried to write the book in a way that people get a sense of the adventure and of the humor of some of it, because there are some dark elements to it, and that had a lot to do with why people were sort of reluctant to talk about it. And
Nick, how many people on the wanted list were actually caught and served their time?
all of the people that were on the wanted list are either deceased now or did their time. And some of the people that are on that wanted poster had nothing to do with the Brotherhood. In fact, one of the guys on there, this Afghani brother of the two main brothers that were supplying this hash, he just worked at the U.S. Embassy, and he was like a limo driver. He came to Disneyland. The thing was is that the Brotherhood, including Bob Ackerman, brought these guys to Hawaii because they wanted to see Hawaii. And then another group within the Brotherhood like hijacked them and brought them out to Disneyland, and the feds were following them everywhere. And I interviewed people in Laguna Canyon that were trying to tell me about the time the premier of Afghanistan, or the king of Afghanistan, came to Laguna Canyon, but it was probably this limo driver. So people like him had the misfortune of being grouped in on this wanted poster, and there are a few others that that really just had nothing to do with it that were on there. But all of them have been, there's nobody out there that hasn't already faced the music.
A couple of years ago, I heard rumors about a documentary on the Brotherhood. Did you run across that?
Yeah, no, I'm friends with the guy that's making it, and
It's still being made? It's
yep.
just a slow process because there's no money anyway, right?
Yeah, slow process, and he's got a day job filming commercials, and so and a family to support, so he's got sort of juggle responsibilities. He's still going for it. I got his card. He told me to give it to anybody that would be interested in hearing more about it, so I can give you his card if you're interested. But I've seen some of the raw stuff that he's done, and it's really great. And he's made a trailer that's really, I think it's got a lot of potential.
Is there any mention in your book of Abby Hoffman or Paul Krautner?
No.
Is Billy Hitchcock in your book?
Yeah, but I mean, just in the sense of that he owned the Millbrook estate and a few other things like that.
Okay, I met him in Aspen. He gave me a big chunk of hash and told me I was off of. Came in the surfboard from when they were filming Endless Summer.
Oh, really?
It's kind of it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
68, I think.
Still got it?
No. We can have it. Smoke it right away.
He was a big friend to Larry and Brotherhood.
He was also. I remember we traded. He was pushing MDA then, which was predecessor of ecstasy, I guess.
One guy of that ilk that I did get to meet, which was really cool, is Rose Ramdas, who was living in Maui.
Right,
So I was
yeah.
able to talk to him. And he had just come out of surgery that morning. And he
So
was
this
really-
recently?
Pardon me?
Recently?
This would have been like November '08.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah. And
He's on the vet.
yeah, he's much better since then. He was working on this book that's since come out with Metzner.
Birth
yeah.
of a Psychedelic.
Yeah, exactly. So he was telling me about that, but he was great. The one thing that he told me, I asked him, well, do you remember meeting John Griggs? Because I was trying to figure out if Griggs had really gone to Millbrook or not, because part of what I was told was that that's how Larry got lured out, was that Griggs camped out until he got an audience with Larry. He's like, I think I remember John Griggs. I was like, well, what was your impression of him? He literally paused for about like 2 or 3 minutes, just kind of looking around the room. Finally said, I think I thought he was crazy. So,
Nick, they introduced you saying there was going to be a movie. Could you tell a little bit about that? Is there a movie about your book?
well, the documentary that he was mentioning is sort of in progress, yeah.
Oh, that's the same as what you're.
Yeah, and in fact, there's clips on, I have a Facebook fan page for anyone who wants to be one of my Facebook fans.
Cool.
Go click on that, and if you go all the way down to the bottom where I first started putting stuff on there, I put some of the clips with Brotherhood people from that documentary on the website, so you can get a little taste of it.
Although I think you might be referring to the option on your first book.
Yeah,
It was
well, they
mentioned.
mentioned that the first,
When they introduced you, they mentioned.
the first book that I wrote was optioned by Universal Studios, which was wonderful,
Yeah.
and that option expired, as they often do, and
Oh.
so if someone else would like to.
What was your first book?
Oh, it was called Kill the Messenger.
Ah.
The nonfiction account of a journalist.
Oh, cool.
Great
book, great book.
So, they're still out. I don't know.
Do you have a next book what you're working on?
Yeah, I'm really interested in medical marijuana because it's sort of a big issue, obviously, right now. And what's really happening, like in California, as far as that goes, and there's a lot to write about. So, I don't know. That I have a full-time job, and part of what I cover is like what's happening in the medical marijuana situation. Because Orange County, just as they were making a name for themselves, cracking down on the Brotherhood, for example, back in the '60s, are still very militantly against medical marijuana. And so even though the feds used to be busting people because it's illegal under federal law and then it became legal under state law, more people are being arrested now by like local authorities than the feds ever did. So there's a lot happening. Things are about to get really crazy. There's a ballot initiative that could potentially make it legal for anybody, even without a doctor's note, to possess up to like an ounce of marijuana. So I think it's kind of the wave of the future. I want to write something about it, but I don't really know
Yeah.
quite what the book's going to be about yet, other than that.
Cool.
Mexico decriminalized all drugs right now, just on the 5th of May.
Really?
LSD, everything.
Yeah, well,
Hey.
see how that
Pardon?
That's untrue.
Oh, yeah, I was not to put it on.
There's a lot of people that aren't wearing uniforms and badges that don't want that to happen.
What do you think of groups like MAPS and Rick Calvin?
I'm all for it. There was a great National Geographic
Yeah, I saw that.
where they talk about the fact that because of this ridiculous prohibition on LSD back in the mid-60s, they cut short all this really important research that was being done in the therapeutic uses of very powerful substance that I think the Brotherhood might have pushed a little bit too hard. It wasn't right for everybody, but under controlled circumstances, I think it's very important stuff that should be funded. It looks like they're finally starting to come around on that. And the government has like a legal, in DC where I did a reading, I met one of the people that are doing that. And they're using it with, what do you call it? Terminal patients to sort of help them accept the other side of reality that they're about to enter.
When I met you before you talk, I mentioned I worked at Cornell Medical Center. It was one of the last labs that were allowed to do LSD research, because what they were finding out was that they didn't want to find any therapeutic value to it. So then they ended most of that hospital research and put it into 2 Army hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
Also, that it breaks chromosomes was a total fallacy.
The what now?
They used to say
yeah.
that
I
was
heard
just
about
a
that.
scare thing.
Yeah, I wish there was always a rumor that Neil Young's kid that had happened to him because of acid, and then I found out that wasn't true at all. Yeah.
No, I think he has dyslexia or something.
He's autistic.
But autistic, right?
Yeah, but it comes in handy to be able to demonize things, I suppose.
Huh?
Hey, there's a thing called Aquarian Conspiracy, Operation Artichoke, MK Ultra, and Bluebird, where the CIA and the British Secret Services in the 1950s planned an invasion of music and drugs into the United States based on the opium wars that they got everybody strung out. They paid all the chicks $50 a piece to yell when the Beatles got here. I think personally they let us run, and then they shut down all the pot and the acid and the psychedelics and brought the crank and the coke and heroin in. And they worked this because, dude, they knew what we were doing.
Well,
they didn't stop us
It's
in the
history that the CIA was very instrumental.
You can read the
in
reports, and they say it. And the same thing on the mental health, where they wanted to use acid, and these other guys said, no, we can't give these people that. Only the elitists can use that. And that's where they used the CIA, mind control, restraint, shock and stuff versus compassion and etc. And so they just had that thing for Hoffman,
The guy who created
all those guys
Elmer
are there,
Hoffman.
and Stanislav Grof and all those people have been, we've been working with psychedelics curing people forever, you know, so.
Well, there's a lot of great books that talk all about that. Don Lattin's book, the Harvard Psychedelic
Acid Dreams.
Club and Acid Dreams, talks a lot about the CIA and MK Ultra.
Yeah.
So I try to steer away from stuff that had already been written and just write my own new thing, but
Yeah.
Dude, you're awesome.
In your readings, when you give readings, like how often do you get these conspiracy that it's the CIA plot? I mean, because a lot of politicos, to me, a revisionist, or uptight, just generally uptight personalities,
Right.
they're dead certain that the whole thing was a conspiracy. But so how? I mean, these people look pretty. Most of them, like they're aware of true stories, as opposed. But in your readings, what do you get many of these revisionist type of CIA?
Hey, that's all documented fact, my friend, so I can show it to you if you want to look. If you hear the truth.
Well, CIA did have experiments, but
What are you basing your food
that does
truth
not
on?
mean that everybody who took LSD was part of this, was.
what I try to do is demystify the Brotherhood, because the thing about it, and the reason why the book couldn't have been written until now, is that they were very secretive because of the nature of what they were doing, and they had a pretty, heavy-duty experience about it that made it difficult to talk about it for a long time. So a lot of people sort of took the mantle of the Brotherhood, and it spread out of control, and nobody I mean, this is the first time anybody that was really involved in that group talked about it openly in a lot of detail. And the story is really about a bunch of friends from high school that, you know, went on this incredible, crazy adventure in their lives, and some of them emerged from it relatively intact and others didn't. And it's not really, I mean, as far as to directly answer your question, that doesn't come up so much because I'm really trying to tailor my remarks more.
And the audiences that you run into are open, you know, are sink in with you about what you're trying to, you know, what you're trying to explain for the most part. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I hope so, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But everyone's entitled there. I mean, the thing is that I wasn't there. So I'm taking everybody's word for it who I talked to about what happened, and you know, I just tried to do the best I could to try
Hey,
to
stop the
let
war,
the reader
man.
figure it out
Stop
for
the
themselves.
war. You know what I'm saying? It stopped the war, and that wasn't just us, that was everybody. Because it was wrong, all that stuff was.
Did you talk to anybody who had been dealing drugs but hadn't been busted, who were willing to talk about what they had done? And do you know if there's any consequences if somebody had done that a long time ago in talking about?
The thing is as I found out later, if you weren't indicted as part of the Brotherhood conspiracy case of 1972, then the statute of limitations is now expired. They can't indict you for now talking about something you did.
So how far back does that go?
Oh man, it depends on exactly what you're talking about. Certain things there's no statute for, obviously. The guy that ended up getting arrested at the airport after 40 years, he had been indicted and he had never handled it. So that's different. If you've been indicted for a crime, they can catch you whenever, you know. So, but I mean, there are a lot of people that did not talk to me that were in the Brotherhood, and I can only speculate as to why they didn't want to do it. I would take it personally.
What percentage would you say?
Maybe, I don't know, because that's the thing, is like if someone hasn't, you know, all I did was I went down a list of people who I talked to, and I'm like, well, who else can I talk to? And then that would pan out sometimes, and sometimes it wouldn't. And there were some people I really wanted to talk to that I talked to off the record and like under an agreement just for my own edification, and then others that, you know, weren't really in a position to talk, you know, because they're homeless on the beach, and like Tommy Tunnel, I'm still actively trying to track certain people down. But I would say maybe I talked to at least half of the original crew that's still around, but a lot of people have passed away in recent years, and so it's sort of like that's the one good thing I had going for me, is that people started coming to the conclusion, well, if we don't talk about it now, none of us are going to be around to talk about it. So.
People were talking about Timothy Leary earlier, and since he can't speak on his own behalf, what he always said was that he only affirmed what they already knew.
There's certain truth to that.
Hey, Gordon Blackbart said that, hey, if you can tell him my name and get out of jail or get it, you tell him, man. Just don't tell him where I'm at. So we don't care who told anyone, and nobody ever stood up in court against me either. And,
Yeah,
and most of us, nobody
from the
did.
Underground or the Brotherhood were busted.